So welcome back to the Barbell Bikini and Biz podcast. I'm in for another guest podcast today, and it's I don't want to say a morbid topic, but it's probably more a serious topic which we're touching on today. And I'm joined by Hayley Irwin, who, if you don't follow on Instagram, why? Because she's it. She's a little ray of sunshine on social media. I followed Hayley for I don't want to say this and sound a bit weird, like I followed her for so long, but I followed Hayley when I started my fitness journey, so probably touching about 3 years ago now. She's one of the first people I actually followed and watched on YouTube.
Aww.
Yeah, I know.
Thank you so much. I appreciate the long ongoing support.
I know, and now I get to like hang out with her and train with her. It's like dream come true. No, I'm joking. Well,
we did have a good session the other day.
we did have a good session, actually, in fairness, yeah. But what I've always liked about Hayley is her openness and honesty in regards to mental health, which was something which motivated me, inspired me, and made me feel not alone, because there's a lot of things that, whether she knows it or not, we can relate to. There's a lot of overlapping the quote-unquote diagnoses that we've had. Don't like that word, don't like that term, don't like labels, but
completely agree with that.
But there's a lot we can relate on, and I think we got a lot of positive feedback on the psychology podcast I did. So I thought, again, touching on sort of mental health side of things with someone who has got all the experience, all the knowledge, and she's a pretty good speaker, to be honest. She knows how to word things pretty well. So I thought, why not? Let's get her on. So if you don't know Hayley, or if you've forgotten who she is or anything like that, if you want to give a bit of an introduction to yourself.
So my name's Hayley, as you've said. I'm Hayley Irwin Coaching on Instagram, and as the name would suggest, I'm an online coach. I have competed in the bikini category. Don't roll your eyes, Lucy.
Saying anything?
For the last 3 years. I'm not competing this year, but I got into competing more or less as a result of mental health, and it helped me, but it also, I think, hindered me in certain ways as well. I think a lot of people will be the first to bash the fact that to not bash that competing is a way to mask disorders and things like that, but I do kind of think that there is a definite extent to that, and that's not everyone. That was me personally. It depends how you do it, but I have been an online coach and personal trainer for coming up to 4 years now. 3.5, 4 years.
That's when I started following you.
Yeah.
When I was
so I had my
fitness.
So I had my fitness Instagram since probably about 5 or 6 years now. When I went to uni, I went to uni to study English literature. So obviously I'm really using that degree and that 50 grand spent wisely. And yeah, so I, as you've touched on, struggled like greatly with mental health during uni, and like my adolescent years. And I now see my online coaching as a way to support people. And no, I'm not a medical profession, and I will preface that. But from like anecdotal experience, and like yourself, studied bits of psychology at uni. Obviously you did your degree there, but I feel like I have a lot of knowledge that I can definitely help people. And I have helped people with various things like eating disorders and, you know, depression, anxiety, etc. And I think, as you said, like that does stem from my ability to relate to people.
Absolutely.
Because I think it is.
Yeah. You carry on.
Because I think, you know, in order to be a strong person, that doesn't mean that you've never gone through things or that sort of stuff. Like you need to go through things and experience hardships to build that resilience, if that makes sense. Yeah, sure. I feel like people presume that the people that look like they have it all together are the people that have never gone through things, when, you know, the large majority of the time that's actually the complete opposite.
Absolutely. I think that's something we'll touch upon as well in terms of experience of help and support that sometimes we'll come on to that. I'll save that one. So
cool.
Bit of a background. You don't have to give your whole life story unless you really, really want to, but you know, you've said you've experienced with mental health in your adolescence, in your uni years. Let's go back to sort of where I put it in inverted commas here, issues, because it's not.
There's no right or like wrong way to say anything, is there? You can like there'll be always someone that gets their back up to anything.
Especially in this day and age, you can't say anything. But I don't like to label it as like as much as it is a problem and something that needs sorting, I don't like to give it like that dark cloud overhead. So issues in inverted commas, where did they begin, and sort of what are the things that you have experienced?
So when I was 16, 17, I first got dragged to the doctors kicking and screaming, essentially. My mum was like, look, there's something going on with you. Like, and it was that stereotypical thing where I just felt like I couldn't get out of bed. And she'd come in and she'd rip the curtains open and be like, come on, like, it's time to get up. And I'd be like, oh. And she brought it up, and I was like, no, this was sort of when I was going through GCSEs, like 16. And then I was like, I'm fine. And then the following year, when I was doing my AS levels, she was like, look, there's something not right here. So I agreed to go to the doctors, and I had to do a questionnaire, and each question it was multiple choice in terms of like 1, 2, 3 or 4. It was like a grading thing. And then I completed the quiz, and the lady was like, okay, so you have depression and anxiety. And I was like, how can you tell that from a quiz? There was no empathy or sympathy, which is not what I was looking for, but it was just very cold and very like, well, this is what you've got, sort of thing. And they were like, do you want to go on medication? And I said no. So I went down and had some counselling. A lady called Kathy, and I'm sure she helped lots of people, but she sure as hell did not help me. I remember one counselling session, she said to me, do you feel like a pebble? And I was like, what? And she was like, that needs to bury themselves in the edge of the riverbed to stop being pushed along by the river. And I just looked at her and I was like, no, I really don't feel like that. So I was with her for a course of like 12 weeks, I think it was, and kind of concluded that counselling wasn't for me, and that talking wasn't for me, because I felt like all that it had done was bring up all of these problems in my head, which I knew were problems, but then nothing happened, nothing was dealt with. So I kind of got it in my head that counselling was almost a bad thing. And my mum, who is the most supportive woman in the world, love her though I do, I just remember her sitting like in the dentist surgery and going, how's that depression thing going? As if it was something that I was like trying to pursue. And I know she didn't mean it, and every time I bring this up she cringes, but those two experiences coupled together made me think, I can't talk about this. People think it's just something that I'm making up. And when I do talk about it in like a counselling scenario, it's got me nowhere. So I kind of brushed it under the carpet and quote unquote dealt with it myself. And as I'm sure you're aware, it kind of ebbs and flows a little bit.
Absolutely.
So I had some definite good years. I had a lot of social anxiety. Like I remember being at a party and just calling my parents like, I need to get out of here, like just come and pick me up now. And so I suffered with anxiety on that point of view, but I didn't suffer from anxiety at any other time. It was literally just social occasions. And then I went to uni, and for the first year I just lived like a normal quote unquote uni lifestyle, takeaways, pizza, didn't know what gym was, all of that sort of stuff. And then my boyfriend at the time cheated on me, and I was like, I'm going to come back from uni in September. This is at the end of first year. And I'm going to look banging. And he's going to be like, oh my God, what have I missed? So I got into fitness and I loved it, like literally loved it. From day one, I tracked macros. I'm a very all or nothing person. From day one, I tracked macros, tracked steps, tracked everything. Like I loved it. It was great. And it just gave me a sense of purpose, I think, and a release. And then during my second year, it kind of became an obsession. Now this is nothing to do with the ex-boyfriend. This is all to do with me, obviously, but I just had it in my head that I was never good enough unless I was skinny. So I just worked out all of the time. It got to the point where I was walking like 15,000 steps a day, doing one resistance class and one 45-minute spin class, and then 25 minutes less, like every single day.
Wow.
Yeah. And my resistance sessions were like, right, I need to keep my heart rate over 120 at all times. Like, it wasn't like a progressive lift, it was just, how high can I get my heart rate? And being at uni meant I was able to hide it a lot from my parents, when in reality, as a result of the eating or exercise disorder I had, it was just tearing my life apart. Like, I couldn't sit at my desk without falling asleep, like trying to do my dissertation. Any social events, I just lied and said that I was busy or that I had stuff to do, when I would literally just sit in my room and pretend I wasn't in the house. Like, I just felt so critical of myself that I couldn't get anywhere. And then when I went home for summer, my parents were like, what the hell? Because they were only seeing me every like 3 or 4 months. I'd lost like 2 stone since they last saw me. And I got down to like just over 6 stone. So I was very noticeably small. But it was more so how I was acting as well. Like, I went on holiday with my mum, and I planned my meals to a T in my head. And then security took my phage off me, or my Faye, whatever you want to call it, because it's a freaking liquid, isn't it? It's a yogurt. And I just like cried my eyes out in the middle of this airport, and I could just see my mum's face like, oh my God, is this what it's going to be like for the whole holiday? But she was really good. She talked things through with me, and eventually I got there. Like, I realized I couldn't treat myself or my family like this anymore. My uncle sort of said to me, like, I just want my H back, and it just really hit home. So I made a point of like, right, I was never looking back, and it was going to be how I dealt with it. And as I got better physically, my mental health got better as well. I became less anxious. I became happier in myself. And then actually it was only, so that was what, like 3 years ago. And of course I've had my low moods and low months and all of that sort of stuff, but sort of this year, since January, I've really struggled. And because of who I have been previously, I was so scared to open up that I was struggling. You know, I was a PT, I was a coach, you know, I had to have all the answers when I didn't. And so in March or April, I went to the doctors, and I'm on antidepressants currently, and have been since then, because for the first 4 months of the year, I tried everything to like get myself better, and I just couldn't. And I decided, like, it's got to the point where I can't do this anymore. So yeah, and then that's where I am today, and I'm feeling much better.
I think firstly, I just want to say thank you for openness and honesty, because it gets easier with time, I guess. The more it's like a past, not memory, but the more you like learn about it, the easier it is to talk about. But it's still never necessarily easy, and especially when, like you said, the more recent things. And so anyone listening who potentially is on antidepressants or anything, there is no stigma to them. I've been on them, and I think more people than you would think have been on them. So if you are on them, don't be ever ashamed to say I'm on them, or feel weak for being on them, because I think that was the first thing I thought when I got first put on them. Cause first time I went to the doctors, and they didn't give me the option of, do you want them? It was, there you go. And I felt pathetic, because I was like, I can't just be a normal human without them. But you know, you've got to just see it as the same way, you know, a diabetic, my mum always said to me, it's the same way like a diabetic needs insulin. It's just something that you need just to tick you over, and there's no negative stigma at all.
No, and I really thought there was, which is why I never wanted to try them previously, because I like you said, I saw it as weak, and I was just like, oh, I can't do this. And then, as I said, it got to the point where I was like, why am I stopping myself being happy? Because I don't want to take a tablet. Like, that's ridiculous. And I don't shout about the fact I'm on it, but you know, I'm more than happy to be open about it, because there is nothing wrong with it. Like, I think what I learned when I was trying to sort it out myself is there was no reason for me feeling this way. It was literally a biological thing. Like, I didn't have an issue. I'm a very self-aware person. You know, if I've got a problem, I fix it, and I work it out, and I couldn't find a root cause of it. And my mum sort of said to me, like, it's just your brain. There's just a chemical imbalance. So, you know, you can try and resist it all you want, but if there isn't a problem that's causing you to feel like this, you can't change the neurological pathways any other way.
No.
So
there's not, and that's another thing as well, another point. There isn't always a cause, and that's something I've struggled with, is always trying to find a why. Whenever I felt low, I've always tried to be like, I'm quite a critical person, which is why I did psychology, because it's all about being critical. And you're probably quite the same. English, it is about sort of being quite critical with your thinking. So I was always unpicking everything. So if I felt down and anxious, or I'd always be like, why? And actually, a good person who always sort of drilled this into me is your housemate, Sarah, my friend. Hi, Sarah. Shout out, you better be listening. But she always said to me, it doesn't need to be a why. And that's something. So if you are feeling like that and you're trying to unpick why, what's happened, there isn't always a why. And like you said, a lot of the studies into sort of mental health are looking at neurological imbalances, and that's one of the things antidepressants do, is they help. I'm not going to give you the science behind it, because you aren't listening to this to listen to neurobiological science, but it is to do with neurotransmitter activity, and there's a huge relationship, whether it's the cause, whether it's a result, but it is all linked, and that's what the medication can do and help with. So don't be ashamed.
And like what you said, and if anyone's listening and feels this way, and it can feel stupid when you haven't got a reason to. Like, I will be the first to admit that I've had a very privileged upbringing. You know, I lived in very sheltered Surrey. My parents are still together. I remember the first time I went to a counselling session, he was like, right, I'm going to draw out your family tree, when I went for my consultation.
Oh, I remember that.
And he
was
like, and he was like, it's so normal. I was like, I know. I know. I was like, I have no reason to feel like this, but I do. And I think that's probably why counselling didn't work for me, because there wasn't a reason for it. Whereas a lot of the time, obviously, it can be, you know, stemmed from like a parents breaking up or grief or anything like that, which doesn't make it any less hard. Of course it doesn't, but it means that counselling will get you to talk about it and open up and realise what it is and talk things through. Whereas I guess when you don't have anything to talk through as such, that's when medication is necessary.
Absolutely. Just to sort of touch a bit further back now, taking a few steps back as to what you said, with the sort of again, I don't like to use this term because it's negative, but it is what it is, disordered eating. Did you ever get like a formal, not that it makes a difference or validates anything, diagnosis with that, or? Yeah.
So it was diagnosed as orthorexia.
Yeah.
So I went to the doctors when, again, mum dragged me kicking and screaming, when I had an eating problem, and I was put on the waiting list for a nutritionist, because they saw that it was bad, but the NHS waiting list. This was in like the June or July, and I wasn't being seen to the October. And I was like, if I carry on this way, I'm not going to be here by October. So it was diagnosed as orthorexia, but the doctor was like one of the worst experiences I've ever had, honestly. He was like, oh, so do you track your food? And I was like, yeah, I do. And he was like, oh, do you use that app MyFitnessPal? And I was like, yeah, I do actually. He was like, such a good app, isn't it? I lost 1/2 stone on that. And I was like, yeah, wow. I've lost 4.5, but you know, it's not a competition. And so that was when I was like, that's when I reached out to have a coach, because I was like, I need someone who understands me and trusts, that understands the process of exercise and eating, not just going to a nutritionist who's going to put me on 3,000 calories of shakes and all of that sort of stuff, just so that they can tick a box and say that I'm weight restored.
That was literally what happened to me.
Was it?
I got a nutritionist, and she basically made me write out what I was eating. She was like, obviously naff all. And then basically just got this like little pen and just added things to it. But everything that she added to have was literal shit. Like, on a morning I'd be like, oh, I'm just having porridge. She's like, well, can you have crumpets and add Biscoff spread, which obviously is great, but it was all just crap, and like milkshakes and little chocolate brownies. Like, it was all just junk food, and that definitely didn't help, because it's all just,
it doesn't make you feel good in yourself when you eat that.
It's awful. It's like, and she's getting paid how much to do this? Like,
I mean, I could sit at home and do that as a 5-year-old. Tell people.
I know, you know, she gets off in her Audi TT, and it's like, you're just telling me to eat cake, basically. Like, wow. Round of applause.
Not the one.
Karen,
Not
or
the
whatever she was
one.
called.
It's always a Karen, isn't it?
Probably a Karen. But let's talk about sort of experiences with help and support, because for anyone who maybe has struggled, is struggling, there are so many different avenues. Like, it's not just the same as, you know, when you break your leg, they scan it, they look at, you know, whether it needs surgery, whether it needs, you know, just time to rehab. There's a fixed route with sort of a physical illness, or even, you know, sort of more physical illnesses as such. I'm trying to think of one. Brain fog, I can't think of one, but you know, there isn't a set route. Like, you do this course of medication, you do this. With mental health, there is no right way to do it. There is no fixed way of doing it. It's very individual based, and so what works for you won't work for me. Now, I think we're actually quite similar in that we've had similar things work for us and things not work for us, but everyone's different. So let's talk about some of the methods of help from the I mean, we've touched on the counselling. That didn't work for you.
Mm-hmm.
I experienced that didn't work for me. But what things, you're in a good spot now, like you said, you've struggled, but you're in a much better spot. So what things have helped you get to where you are now from where you were?
Initially, what made me make the change and get the help, because I was aware that I had an eating problem, and I lost another half a stone after I told my mum that I was aware I had it, because I wasn't ready to accept the help. But the biggest thing for me was reading. So I read a lot of self-help and self-development books, and the one that I always you know, say that low-key saved me, I guess, was How to Be a Badass by Jen Sincero. If you haven't read it, read it.
I haven't read it, actually.
Oh my god, it's so good. It basically hypes you up so that you think that you are a badass, and you're like, how could I treat myself like this? Like, I'm an amazing person, I have all of this going for me, and I'm ruining my life by doing this. I read The Goddess Revolution as well, which is a lot more like food centric than How to Be a Badass. So if you're struggling with just the eating side of things, I recommend you reading You Are a Goddess, The Goddess Revolution, sorry. And then if you are just struggling in general with mental health and eating too, You Are a Badass is a really good one. But that was what made me realise that I had so much potential that this was holding me back from. So that was a really good one for me. And talking.
Yeah.
I think it's so easy to pretend a problem isn't there when you don't talk about it. As soon as you've got to say it out loud, it suddenly becomes real.
Yeah.
And so as soon as I learned to talk about my friends and talk to my friends and talk to my family and things very openly, I realised that, you know, no man is an island, and the more you connect and the more you open up, the more people can help you, because people aren't mind readers. No. If you don't tell them, they don't know you're struggling at all, and so they can't be like sympathetic or empathetic or anything, because they just don't get it. And it's not always a case of needing or wanting sympathy as such. Sorry, not a case of wanting it, but sometimes it's a case of needing it, especially with like eating issues and things like that. Is you just need someone to be like, not try and force food on you and stuff like that. And but unless you tell people that you're struggling, they're going to be like, why aren't you eating that piece of cake, you weirdo, like etc. So I think for me the two unconventional things were, well, not unconventional, talking isn't unconventional, but opening up to people, reading, and then lastly for me, obviously recently, it's been the medication. Yeah,
absolutely. I think.
What have you found that's helped you?
I was gonna say, I think a lot of them are quite similar. So I've done a variety of things for a variety of reasons. The first thing that happened was I went to the doctors and I got put for because the first thing I went for was my eating issues, and again put on a waiting list, which they basically said she needs to get seen now or she's gonna basically die. Because I was a child, there was less of a waiting list, so they could ramp me up. I got cognitive behavioural therapy there, and it didn't do anything really. I was on medication for anxiety and depression, sort of antidepressants, anti-anxiety, even though they weren't the issue at the time. I mean, like, there is overlap, which is a
definitely.
complex subject altogether. But they were just throwing at me just as a sort of, I think it was just them saying, right, we've done something, which I genuinely think that's all it was. They're like, shit, we've got this person who's very poorly, we need to look like we've done something, so let's give her some medication, it might help. Didn't help, came back like 2 weeks later, dropped like another half stone or something crazy, so. But what helped me through my eating disorder, my main thing, 100%, getting me to the best from where I was, which was a very, very bad place. And I still have problems now, which I do speak out about. But to get to that place where I could, I was a healthy weight and food wasn't a chronic fear, like I wasn't having panic attacks, was genuinely just my nana. So what happened was I went to go live with her for quite a bit because it was just, wasn't that I was like kicked out or anything, but the way I was, because I was literally having like meltdowns and like screaming at my family over food. And I had like a young sister, she was like 6 at the time and she didn't understand. So I went to go live with my nana, and again it was the talking, just having the patience, having time out. And I had like my own little, because I wasn't going into school because I couldn't, because I wasn't well, so I had my own little space, and I did lots of sort of relaxation things, so the hippie stuff, so like reading, and I had those colouring books, those anti-stress colouring books, and keeping my mind busy, and again just talking to her. So when I felt bad, she'd just sit down and we just talk about things, and sometimes we talk about things that were off topic, just totally off topic, but just taking your mind off things. So that was probably the main thing that helped me with that. And then with the other issues that I've had more recently, again, sort of, I don't want to say the label because I don't know what it was, but what the hospital said was anxiety and depression. I guess, again, talking, friends, having a lot of support and making people aware. The people around you need to be aware, and I know it can be hard to talk to them. Like, I didn't tell my family at all that I was going through anything. My friends knew, and people at work knew, but my family had no idea. And it got to a point where, I don't want to go into detail, but I got into a very, very, very dark spot, and so they had to become aware. And it was sad that they had to become aware through that.
Yeah, that you couldn't be open with them before.
Yeah, that. And they were upset. Like, they weren't angry, they were upset that I couldn't tell them. So, but ever since then, they've then been aware. So they now know, so for example, when I was going quieter, that it wasn't that I was just being quiet, that they thought, okay, she's maybe not feeling good, so we'll talk to her. So have people aware. And I know it can be so hard to tell people, but it will be the best thing you ever do, because having people aware means that they can support you and know that if you are having a bad day, they're not just thinking, oh, she's been a moody person again. They might actually reframe their mindset and think, you know what, she's maybe struggling, let's talk to her. And that'll help you, because if they think you're being moody, they'll just be moody and arsey back. So they'll be like, oh, screw you. But if they understand that you're struggling, the way they communicate with you will be more supportive and helpful. And I have been on medications at time for a variety of things. Probably most things that you could get prescribed with, I've had. Guinness World Record, but at some points they've served me a purpose and others they haven't, but they have at times really helped. So again, there's no stigma to that. They've helped and they have served a purpose at time. So pretty good. Similar to you, really. Pretty similar.
Nice.
But again, I guess one that helps me now, moving on to the next point, nice little transition smoothly here, you're probably the same, is fitness. The bodybuild, I mean, whether you want to call it that, but the fitness lifestyle in general is something that's definitely saved me over the last few years. My final year at uni, my first year at uni, I was in a weird spot. I'd sort of transitioned out of an eating disorder and gone to uni, and in that time period my nana passed away very tragically, and I sort of went from the stability of being at home to then being at uni, and I sort of went the other way. I sort of lost control. I wanted to stay in control, because that's what an eating disorder is, but not in a different way. So it was through sort of drinking and overeating, and I don't want to call it binging, because it wasn't binging, but just overeating, but in a controlled way. So I'd restrict all day and then have controlled periods where I'd eat loads, and I gained a load of weight, didn't go to the gym, I'd stopped exercising, and I was seriously fat. And I then started up fitness. I started with a personal trainer, and just getting into it. And for me personally, the bodybuilding side of things, because it is so meticulous and it is a way of controlling things in a healthy way, is what gets me through day to day now. But let's talk about fitness as well, and potentially the benefits and how it's helped you. So I think we got to you starting with a coach, didn't we? That's what we sort of.
Yeah, so I started with a coach. I mean, I was already sort of quote unquote into fitness then, but I was doing it myself, and instead of using like my Fitbit to make sure I was eating in a surplus, I was using it just as a to make sure I was eating in a deficit, and it was just a bit messy and all of that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And I think it is really important that you look at fitness as a way that it is positive. Like, you know, it gives you a sense of purpose, gets you out of bed in the morning. As you said, you can track it so that you can see you're progressing, and then you feel good about yourself, because obviously a lot of the time with sort of anxiety and depression, you know, you never feel good enough, and you never see any progress, etc. So, you know, using things like a logbook can be really helpful in that respect. All of that sort of stuff. And like you've said, there's the element of control that bodybuilding can give you if you choose to go down that route. But arguably, I feel like, I mean, I will be the first to admit that my first season of competing was I embarked on because I wanted to be lean again.
Yeah.
And I didn't know any other way to diet without everyone else freaking out. So I was like, well, if I compete, then I've got this reason to not eat, and I've got this reason that I'm doing loads of cardio, and I've got this reason that I'm getting small, which people can't criticize me for. And then I think that's also, like, in my off season, I never got like 5 kilos above stage weight in my first off season, which I needed to do because I needed to grow a lot of muscle. So, you know, staying really lean in off season for me at that point was just ridiculous. So then during my second year of competing, I competed more than once. I only did one show in that first year. And I just fell in love with the sport of it. And then that following off season, I was fine, you know, putting on like 15 kilos, etc. And all of that sort of stuff. Like, don't get me wrong, I'm not saying I was fine in terms of I wasn't like conscious of my body, like I was, but I did it for the sport. Oh, sorry. Theo's got a toy. So yeah, I did it for the sport, and I fell in love with it. And the more I do it, the more I realize that, you know, yes, it's amazing having that control, but you can't rely on that. And your strength is only as good as how you can adapt it. Like, having all of these healthy routines and, you know, tracking your macros and all of that sort of stuff is good to a certain extent, but it's only good if you can let yourself do the opposite, if you can let yourself, you know, guess things and all of that sort of stuff. It's not good if it means that you just restrict unnecessarily to the point where you won't eat something or you won't do something because you can't have your meal. Like, I get it in a prep, it's completely different, but in terms of an off season, or if you're not competing at all and you're just, you know, tracking macros so that you can monitor your progress a little bit more, you know, it's a healthy habit for some people, but for others it's not. And some people will go into competing and never have eating issues, and it annoys me when people say that competing gives you eating issues. I understand that it might change the way you look at food in terms of like numbers and all of that sort of stuff, but I do strongly believe that if you have an eating problem or you have issues around food, competing will heighten that. There's no doubt about it. But it's not competing that's done that, it's you and your mindset. Absolutely. Because there's some people who go through it and never have an issue if they've had, you know, a healthy relationship with food all their life. But a lot of people, I think, will use fitness to the extreme, where it is a reason to stay lean and it's a reason to miss out on things and all of that sort of stuff, which is just completely not what it should be. It should be about getting that endorphin rush and getting that, you know, making that progress in whatever progress looks like to you. Yeah. Does that make sense?
Makes perfect sense. And I guess then it does become hard in some respects if, you know, people have had issues. Like, for me, I've had issues in the past with food. And like, I remember at one point someone saying to me, it was a couple of years, you know, I think when I first decided I wanted to compete, it was about a year and a half ago. Yeah, 2 years ago. 2 years ago. Was it 2 years ago? It was the first time I ever saw it and thought, oh my God, that's something I want to do in the future. And someone was like to me, is that sensible for you? Because of your relationship, is it going to bring everything back? And I was like, at that point, I was like, you know what, that's actually a good point. And maybe then I wouldn't have been as in a strong position. And I've just been through a quote unquote, whether you want to call it prep or a strict diet for what was going to be the first show, wasn't the first show, sad times, but it is what it is. Has it brought stuff back? Yes, and also no. Now, but I'm open and honest to talk about that. You okay?
Yeah. Sorry, Theo's just going for the toy again, and I was like, the way she just
like, don't you dare.
I was like, God.
Inconsiderate, aren't they? They're so inconsiderate.
I know, bloody puppies. But yeah, I get what you mean. Like, it depends on the headspace that you're in at that time.
Yeah.
Do you think now you'd be able to compete with a healthy mindset?
I think for me, it's always going to be a challenge. There's always going to be problems, and I'm always going to have anxieties. But as every year's gone on since that year when it was like horrendous and I was like crying over stuff, I've got mentally stronger with time. I remember the first time my first coach dieted me down because I was fat when I started. So I was literally fat. Young people say I was fat. I was genuinely pretty hefty. Hence why there's not many pictures of me, because I didn't take many because I looked horrible. And then the first time she said to me was like, oh, so it was a few months later, so I dieted down and I was, I looked normal. I wasn't like lean, like tiny, but I was normal. And she was like, oh, what are you having post-workout today? I was like, oh, I'm having a salad again. She goes, what? I was like, yeah, I'm having salad. Because that was what was on my diet plan for like the first few months, because I was fat. I shouldn't say that really, should I? But I was bigger. I had weight to lose. And she was like, no, go home and eat a bowl of cereal. And I was like, what? She's like, yeah, go home. You've trained hard. You need carbs, Lucy. Go have some cereal. And I was like, what? Can't do that. And I just did it. And I remember feeling really weird about it. And that's actually where my cereal obsession started, from that amazing bowl of Cocoa Pops I had after not eating anything like that for ages. But again, it was just building up little habits. And then sort of another time I dieted down, I got sort of anxieties about things. And now I wouldn't say how it was this time was, I think I managed to stay in control of things, because the coach I'm with now, I trust her with everything. She's had issues before, so she gets it, which is something that really helps. Mm-hmm. And what we're doing now is we're working on overcoming anxiety things at a time. Like, I will be open and honest and say now, like, things like going out for like an off-plan sort of meal, an untracked meal now would be a bit, I could do it, whereas in the past I couldn't, but I would feel still a little bit anxious about it. But it's about building up. So like this week, there's things that I would, because in prep I tracked everything. This week it's a small goal of, right, this week we're just not tracking these minuscule items that don't matter, like almond milk and coffee and stuff that just does not matter because it's negligible. Which if you are just in off season, guys, or if you are just into fitness, please don't track your almond milk and your coffee or your sauce or your seasoning or anything like that, because there's no need. Honestly, there really isn't. Like, don't stress over the small things like that. But I'm getting mentally stronger, and I know that I'm in probably the best position I've ever been in. And because I care so much about my goals now, of getting stronger and building muscle, that I know that I can overcome these anxieties, whereas in the past, it just no chance. And also friends have really helped. Like, I don't know if Sarah's in the room now and stuff, but being like friends with people like that who got it, but also were help me, they helped me. So like a couple of years ago, if you'd said, oh, would you go out for a donut or anything, I'd be like, no. Whereas last year, Sarah got me on the Temple hype and I was going all the time. So little things like that I've managed to build up over time. So I'm not better, but I'm so much stronger than I was. And I do feel mentally strong enough to be able to handle a prep and not get myself back into like a bad habit or place with everything.
That's amazing. Well done. You should be really proud of yourself for that.
Thank you. I've got my medal ordered on the way. I'm joking.
I'll make you a certificate as well.
Yeah, that's getting laminated as we speak. But no, but one thing I do want to say as well, I think you're probably the first one to say, is if you are still having anxieties, quite strong anxieties, such as you have to track everything, you are chronically scared of gaining weight. Like, yes, it's hard for anyone who's in that position where you've got to reverse, or you've got to gain a little bit of body fat to build muscle. It is hard. That's not what I was saying. I mean, chronically fear of, like, if that number goes up, you will have a breakdown. Don't prep.
No.
Don't
put yourself through that. Focus on getting your head in a good place first, before you even consider it. Even like, yeah, please don't do that, because it's the way that I think that you get over things like anxieties is just doing it.
Yeah.
So whether it's if it's going out for meals or something, then just doing it. I remember that first meal that I ever went when my first coach told me to have an off-plan meal. My best friend Megan, who's my longest friend, she will I'm so sorry, she's dragging her bed across the floor like a mad woman. I'm just going to leave the room is what I'm going to do.
Take yourself away from the situation.
Yeah, take myself away from it. So essentially what the first time I did it, I was so anxious all day. I was just horrible to be around. Like, honestly, I was snappy, because you'll understand what it's like, where you just can't get your head around it.
No.
And the thought of doing anything that's off plan is just controls your mind completely.
It does.
To the point where you can't even focus on what's ahead of you or in front of you, because all you're thinking about is how many calories are in that meal, how many this, how many that. And so you can't have a conversation and be a normal person, because you've got so much going on in your head. But the way that I feel like you overcome anxiety is doing it. Yeah. And a prep is the opposite of that. It's stopping yourself doing that for 6 months. Yeah. And therefore, when you try again to do it,
just 10 times harder.
Those anxieties are going to be there again.
So much harder. What?
So I think that's where I would say prep is a negative for someone who struggles with anxiety around food. Because essentially you're having to restrict, which doesn't make, which is what is necessary, do the necessary. But is competing worth ruining your relationship with food that you've worked so hard to get to a good spot?
No debate. Absolutely not. 100%.
So
no, 100%. Let's go on to something helpful for the people. If anyone out there is obviously struggling, which I gather there will be someone, at least one person there'll be people who can relate, but there may be someone out there who's struggling right now. And I'm not saying this because I hope there is someone out there struggling. God, no.
No, of course not.
If they've listened to this off the bat of thinking, this may be something relatable, and you've watched this point, thanks for still listening, if you are still listening, of course.
Yeah, thanks.
God. Pause, delete. We want to provide something in terms of help and taking, actionable steps to getting support. So I'll give my first point. The first one is to talk to someone. There will be someone out there who you can trust or speak to, whether it's a friend, whether it's family, a teacher, someone you work with. And it might sound stupid, but even just someone through social media. Now, obviously, eventually you want to get to a point where you can actually speak to people, because I think actually saying things rather than typing things makes a huge difference. But people like me and Hayley, I'm sure Hayley feels the same. We are open. We're not medical professionals, but because we've been there, we understand, and we can and will empathise and offer guidance. So my door's always open, not literally. God, no, I'm not giving out my address. But
your Instagram door is always open.
Yeah, my DMs are always open. I think that's what I meant to say there.
There we go.
That's what we meant to say. My door is always open. Here's my address. Come round, everyone. Get on. But metaphorically speaking, I'm always open to talk. But if you can get your work, 'cause it doesn't, like you said, when it makes it real, when you can actually physically say something. When you write it, I mean, if you do struggle, you can always write it and give it to someone, and then they can sort of initiate the conversation. That's something I've done before. Mm-hmm. But actually physically speaking to someone, get it out there, and once it's there, it's real. And from there, that's when things, I always think, just seem to unfold.
Yeah, 100%. And I think letter writing is something that I actually really strongly advise a lot of my clients to do when they are trying to open up to their family. Mm-hmm. And also friends to do as well, because I think that the good thing about writing a letter is that you get everything you want to say down. Sometimes when you go to say something,
you can't say
or you just lose it, like you're crying or you don't think of it, and then you leave the situation and go, why didn't I say this, this and this? So that's when, like, if you're not writing a letter, like, you know, make bullet points before you go down so you can sort of know that you're going to say everything that you need to.
Yeah.
As you said, talking is the best thing. And like you said, there will be someone. It may not always feel like there's someone, but there is someone that will listen. And if not, there's the Samaritans.
Yes, that's another thing. Samaritans, there's a lot of Samaritans, and
yeah, there's like Mind Charity,
Beats, there's all sorts. I'll link a lot of them. I'll link a lot of them in the show notes as well. A lot of the good ones that I've used or know of. Even just reading some of the things they put, the blogs that other people have put, is just sometimes quite comforting to know that you aren't alone. So
no, exactly
as well.
And I think the biggest thing to do is to remind yourself that this is a very real but very temporary situation. That's one of the like phrases that I always say. How you're feeling is valid, and you're allowed to feel however you're feeling, and you should never ever let anyone tell you any different. Whatever you're feeling for whatever reason is valid. And so you've got to feel them, and until you feel them, you'll never move past them. So the quicker you accept those feelings and understand that's how you feel, the quicker you will get over it.
Absolutely.
And it's not going to be a linear process.
No. There'll
be good days, there'll be bad days, there'll be good months, there'll be bad months.
Yeah.
You know, and it might come back to bite you on the bum at some point. As I said, like, I've been absolutely fine for the last 2 years. And then over the last 8 months or 7 months now, I was in a dark place and I hadn't been there in a while. But the reason that I didn't give up is that I knew I've done it before, I could do it again. And I understood that it was a temporary situation. Nothing lasts forever. No.
You will get to a point where
those negative feelings won't.
Good days will outweigh the bad, always. And it can be quite a daunting thing, thinking that it's potentially something that you might have for the rest of your life and it will come and go, but it happens, you know. The good days will outweigh the bad, and if you are feeling right now, well, what is the point? Will things get better? As cliche as it sounds, they do.
Yeah.
They do. Think back to a point in your life when you were happy and quote unquote feeling normal. That will come back. You've just got to believe that it will, and know that good days will outweigh the bad eventually. 100%.
100%. And as I said, it's a case of always being open about how you're feeling. That would be like my biggest piece of advice. And seeking help when you can't do it alone. There's a reason that all of these charities exist, because you're not expected to do things on your own. No, it doesn't make you weak.
Doesn't make, you know, it's not, you know, if a diabetic was struggling, you know, they needed insulin, they're not going to be like, oh, I feel weak, so I'm not going to do it, because that's going to detriment their health. It's the same, you know, you've got an earache, you go and sort it out. It's not weak to have it. It happens.
If you break your leg, you get a cast. All of that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, let's wrap this up here, but first I'll say thank you. Thank you for, one, coming, giving up your time, and two, openness and honesty, because it's not easy to speak about. And yes, it gets easier with time, like I mentioned, to speak about things, but it's never an easy thing, because whether we like it or not, there is still negative stigma. There is still our own perceptions of how we feel, because we might think, like, I know for me, sometimes I think if I open up and speak on something like this about what I've had, will that skew people's perceptions of me? If people don't know who I am, is that going to give them a preconception of me? But I've learned to deal with that. You know, it doesn't faze me anymore. It's not a part of my identity. You know, you don't look at someone who's got, let's go with diabetes, and look at them as they've got diabetes or they've had diabetes. You look at them as Sarah or Karen or Tom. They're just them. It doesn't define them, and it won't define you either.
Not at all. And I think again, it's one of those anxieties where the more you talk about it, the more you'll be okay to talk about it.
Yeah.
And another piece of advice, sorry, just to keep this podcast going any
longer.
Go on. Is that if you have a negative experience about when you open up with someone judging you or anything like that, please, please, please don't give up.
No.
Don't see that as everyone will think that about you, because they won't. and it's just a case that perhaps it was to the wrong person for whatever reason that was. So yeah, don't be disheartened if the first time you tell someone something it doesn't go to plan, so to speak.
No, because it might not. But
No,
there are definitely more people out
if
there.
it won't, that's
Yeah.
that, but that doesn't mean that everyone will have that opinion.
There's definitely more people out there now than ever who are going to understand and support than ever. You know, the people who maybe don't quite understand or support will be the minority now, because there is so much awareness. Yes, there's still stigma, but there is so much more awareness and understanding and acceptingness. So know that. But let's finish on the positive. On the signature question of the podcast. Your favourite cereal, Hayley. And I know, actually, before we get into this,
I knew you were going to say that.
Yeah, it needs to be talked about. This is a serious topic right here. Everyone who listens to this podcast and knows me knows that I am a cerealaholic. Cereal is life. I think I was on it before it became like quote unquote trendy in bodybuilding, which I think I should have got some sort of credit for. I really do. But then obviously all the IFBB pros who do it, they get the credit for it because they're IFBB pros. But they copied me. They really did. But yeah, we were in the car on the way home from training, and I was just talking about what everyone was having post-workout, and I think Hayley was like, "Oh, I've got cereal." I was like, "I don't sound excited." She's like, "Well, I'm not. I'm not really bothered about it," and that's a disgrace. I mean, it really, really
I
is.
have never been bothered about cereal. I mean, right now, my cereal is because I have zero appetite at the peak of an off season. I literally never thought I'd see that day. This is the first off season I've lost my appetite. However, I've just never been bothered by it. In prep, I remember my coach being like, have an extra 50 grams of cereal for a refeed. And I was like, is there not something else I could have? It just doesn't float my boat.
Well,
I'd rather have something.
Of the terribleness of cereal, which is the least of the terrible.
So my go-to is a combo. I have Cookie Crisp, which is elite tier. I think if I had to choose one, it would be that. But my go-to is a mixture of Cookie Crisp, Nesquik, and Cocoa Pops.
Like as in like a fruit salad, but of cereal.
Yeah, so I never have one cereal. I always have a mixture.
I like mixing. They're quite similar to mix.
Yeah, but then, so the Cookie Crisp isn't pure chocolate. The Nesquik and the Cocoa Pops are pure chocolate. But you have the different variations in size. So one goes soggier and one doesn't. So you got a bit of crunch, you got a bit of sog.
Okay.
And you got a cookie.
Okay. I'll give you that.
What's your favourite?
Oh, it varies, man. It varies. Like, depends obviously what macros are saying as well, because do you like cinnamon?
Yeah.
I've just got one called Cinnamon Stars. I think you can get in B&M. Now, that's awesome. I think if you like cinnamon, if you have cereal on your program, I'd invest, because it's very cinnamony. Like, you know, like cinnamon squares they're quite sweet cinnamon. Mm-hmm. This is more of a classic cinnamon. It's pretty decent. But I'll show you what my favourite one is, because it's still in my room because I can't utilise it yet because the macros aren't quite great. I got it for my birthday. This one, if you're watching it on the video.
Cocoa peanut butter balls. Oh.
The macros aren't great. Like for a serving, it's 170. I mean, it's 40 gram serving, so it's slightly more, but 172 calories. It's 5.6 fat. That's my main issue. Like with cereal, you want it for the carbs. But
yeah, you're not wanting it for the fat.
But it's so worth it. Trust me.
Oh, I might have to try that. Reese's peanut butter cup is my jam.
I'll bring you more gifts.
Thanks.
Anytime. But anyway, guys, thank you for listening to this one. Hope it's provided you insight. Hope it's potentially, if it's been relatable, you know, it's been helpful in that respect. And again, if you are struggling, guys, don't struggle. You know, speak out, and because help and support is there.
Yeah.
Thank you
so much for having me on. I feel very honoured to be a guest.
You should be. Only the elite get chosen. Okay. Yeah. Let's just leave it there. Thanks, guys.